Welcome everyone to the fourth Protocol Town Hall. We are so happy to see so many faces joining us every month. And to kick it off today, I'll be giving an update just on the foundation. So as you might know, the last few months have been focused on migration. We're well on our way into phase 2 and phase 3. And so you'll be hearing more public updates about that shortly. We also wanted to announce sort of a new initiative that we're doing, which is a wave of RFPs. So we did our wave 1 of grants last quarter. We'll be doing a wave 2 of grants this quarter as well, but we also have a ton of RFPs we'd love to share with you. So I'll just quickly share my screen. And so as many of you know, the Graph Foundation website, the graph.foundation, is a Notion page that's quite interactive. This is our interim page, but we will be launching an RFPs page today where we have over 40 projects that we would love to see our community build. And I can go into each of these. So, to start in the dApps category, we're looking for someone to build, a simple UI to help our governance process and streamline the information flow with the Radical GIPs and also our forum. We're looking for someone to create a curator rewards calculator similar to the ones that exist for delegators. And similar to other DeFi analytics dApps that query subgraphs, we really want to create an NFT UI or dApp that can make the NFT community much more rich with sharing data. Within the subgraphs, we have actually about 20 subgraphs that we'd love to see built. These have been requested by a lot of top tier projects, and they're looking for high quality subgraphs, that could take anywhere from 30 to 45 days to get to full completion. So head on over to see which ones are here. If you happen to be, an expert in that protocol, we'd love to work with you to get that finished. Within the community building, we have quite a few things around, educating the community more about our own initiatives. So like taking notes for the protocol town hall, weekly educational memes about the graph. So that might be educating about specific users or maybe, specific experiences like indexing or curating on the network. We'd also love to see a Web3, what we're calling Bits and Bytes newsletter, similar to, Robinhood Snacks or other communities. We want to start creating more bite-sized content around Web3 and what's being developed. We also have these 2 community building RFPs that we're excited about. One is an economic report, similar to past reports that were made on Ethereum 2.0, assessing the economics, certain trade-offs for users, and helping indexers and curators basically be informed about the economics of participating in the protocol. And we also have one for creating documentation for Hard Hat. So currently our documentation supports Truffle, but we've gotten a lot of requests for Hard Hat docs. Within the indexer tooling, this is the largest category. So would love, you indexers to help submit a proposal or help other teams build this out. But we've got quite a few tools that can help indexers just better assess their own infrastructure needs, how to meet, certain query traffic, and basically be ready for the mainnet migration. And you can take a look into each of these. So one of them being, a query traffic simulator to help indexers understand, how to scale their infrastructure on testnet. Another is, load testing Ethereum. Sometimes the issues aren't at the graph node level. And so better understanding what's happening on the Ethereum mainnet and how that relates to the protocol. Lastly, we've got a few RFPs here for the indexer community. So we'd love to create more high quality content that can get new indexers or node operators from 0 to 100. So one of them is, an indexer all-in-one video tutorial series. This would go through step-by-step of how to deploy a graph node, covering some of the topics that the Graph Foundation and Edge and Node have covered in workshops, but a little more streamlined and clean cut. So new indexers or new node operators are ready to serve the network. Another one that I'm really excited about is Postgres consulting and workshops. We got some advice that, a lot of indexers would really gain from having more Postgres expertise. And so we're looking for Postgres experts in our community to come help indexers provide mentorship and develop guides so they can optimize their infrastructure. So please keep in touch. We'll be sharing these on Discord, Twitter, and the forum later today, and we hope to see your proposals. And now I'll pass it off to Reem to do a grantee spotlight.
Thanks, Eva. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's really nice again to see a lot of you familiar faces, but for those who don't know me and are joining us for the first time, my name is Reem and I'm the ecosystem manager here at the foundation. I oversee a lot of the grants and projects that are being streamlined here. And it's always my absolute pleasure to highlight our grantees with this grantee spotlight. As a reminder, for those of you that are wondering if you can still apply for a grant, applications are still open for wave 2. So definitely, if you have any ideas, put them through and we're happy to meet with you. And for everyone that already has applied, we do definitely appreciate your patience while we go through all of the interviews and follow up with the process moving forward. But without further ado, I do want to hand over the baton to Michael. Michael's grant is developing something called SkyDocs, but I'm going to leave it to him to go into that more in depth.
Hi, I'm Michiel. I'm a developer from the Netherlands. I will give you a short update on the progress of my grant. I'm working on SkyDocs. SkyDocs is a decentralized Google Docs alternative that uses Saya for storage. Saya is a decentralized cloud storage platform, and they have created Skynet, which is a content delivery network on top of the Saya network. And they provide easy APIs that you can use in your apps or decentralized apps, just like the Graph APIs. I will show you my app, SkyDocs, tell you about the work I've done and I'm going to do. Share my screen. This one. Okay, this is the SkyDocs app. When you go to the app, you are presented with a login screen. You can log in with a username and password, but there is no registration step because it's decentralized. There's no central registration. So your username and your password generate a seed for a public and private key pair for the Saya storage. As part of the grant, I've developed a MetaMask login option. When you use that, you will be asked to sign a string to prove you actually own your Ethereum address. After that, you can log in. I've already signed that string with MetaMask. It's encrypted and stored in your local storage, in your isolated storage in your browser. So now I can just easily log in. After that, you are presented with a simple screen where you can see your documents. It looks a little bit like Google Docs with a preview, and yeah, you can see what you're working on. You can edit documents, delete documents. It's a pretty basic app, but it works decentralized. That's pretty cool. With the grant I received from the Graph, I've given the app a whole new updated user interface and developed the MetaMask login. But of course, I'm not finished yet. I'm currently working on integrating the app with the Graph. You will be able to share documents using a subgraph, and then you can see which documents are shared with you. I'm also looking at adding some small delighters, like showing your Gravatar or your Ethereum name, because I can easily query that from existing subgraphs. I think we are currently at a great point in time. It's starting to become possible to develop real distributed apps. Some infrastructure is ready, but a lot is being developed, and we are still super early. Everybody is building, and there are new things coming out every day, and that's great. And I think it's really important to contribute to that, and that's why all of the tools I'm developing, also as part of this grant, can be used as building blocks for other apps. I'm developing this application, SkyDocs, with Microsoft.NET and C#. I'm using Blazor to compile it to WebAssembly. This makes it possible to use static file hosting like Saya Skynet. The MetaMask login I've created as part of this grant for Skydocs is open source and other developers can use it. It's an easy package developers can add to their application. The Skynet API to communicate with SIA Skynet is also open source, can also be used by other developers. And I'm already working on a subgraph. It's needed for Skydocs, but I've made it more generic. So other developers can also use it. I've named it the Share It network. And it's a smart contract. You can send your app ID to an data you want to share. Well, it's a generic subgraph, so other people might be able to use it too. And I'm also going to develop C# SDK to communicate with the graph APIs. That's also a building block for other developers. I think it's really important to help this space forward, and other developers can build new distributed apps that are even better than mine. And that's what I wanted to show you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Michael. That was awesome. And then for this next one, this is a community grant. Unfortunately, they can't be here because they're actually in a class right now, but they did share a message with us via a video recording. I'll probably be skipping through some of the grant itself just to kind of save some time, but we'll definitely share the link for you to view it after. So without further ado, here's Eliana and team with the graph educational videos. One moment while I share.
Hi everyone, my name is Alena. I'm from Belarus. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate that I'm part of such great graph community from the early beginning. I've been testnet creator, delegator, and first wave grantee. And now my project is the creation of educational videos in English and Russian language to educate new users about the protocol and how to take part in different activities. We strive to cover both technical and non-technical topics, but the main idea to show people that these topics are really interesting and no need to be afraid of such terms as Web 3.0, GraphQL, subgraph, depth, and so on. We try to talk in simple language about complex, but it's better to see once. And now I will show you some fragments from my videos. Here we go.
Когда мы слышим о блокчейн-технологиях, у нас возникает много вопросов. Что это такое, для чего нам это нужно и как это работает? Если вы еще не знаете, что такое DEP, Web 3.0, чем проект The Graph облегчает жизнь разработчиков и как мы можем вместе участвовать в развитии проекта, обслуживать сети и зарабатывать, продолжаем смотреть это видео. Здесь мы стараемся рассказывать простым языком о том, что кажется сложным. DEP – децентрализованное приложение. Это приложение, которое не принадлежит компании или частному лицу. Web 3 – это
Yeah, visualization is really important. English version is coming soon. Thank you guys for having me, and I hope we will work together soon.
Awesome. And that's it for today. We'll be sharing these resources after the town hall so you can view the video in its full glory, but we're definitely really excited and impressed by all of this art here today. Back to you.
Awesome. Brandon, do you want to take over?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Wow, it's really great to see those. So yeah, I'll start off with some housekeeping. Since the last protocol town hall, we've had a couple minor upgrades to the protocol. The first one actually, I think, took place the same day as the last protocol town hall, just completed a little bit later in the day. And that was for upgrading the rewards manager contract. And this is something that both the community voted on in a snapshot poll, as well as the Graph Council. Just to quickly review that for folks that, maybe new to these town halls, the Graph ecosystem uses snapshot voting, both for community polling as well as for the Graph Council votes. So if you go to snapshot.org, you can search for the Graph Council and you can see, precisely the vote that led to that upgrade. You can see who voted for it, as well as, specifically what GIP and the GIP's repo and like what the latest commit in that repo was for that upgrade. So that completed about a month ago. Everything went smoothly. We've had another minor, and that was for this GIP, just for those that are curious, GIP 3, which we've discussed in previous town halls. Next minor upgrade was just simply a parameter change. This was more about allow listing, a contract that we call the allocation exchange contract. This is part of the roadmap to full vector plus scalar state channels on mainnet. This basically unlocks the scalar side of that for the current subgraph migration. So this is a contract that most folks probably will not interact with. It's sort of a stopgap, if you will, that primarily edge and nodes funds will be placed into. But yeah, there's a second GIP. Actually, I believe it's already been shared for the withdraw helper, which is the contract that does this kind of same thing except for vector. So that's something to stay tuned for, that you should see talk about in the forums and maybe a council vote on in the near future. So those are kind of the two that are related to the the current migration. I think I mentioned in a previous town hall that we've also done a lot better job about booking auditors time, which means that we're now getting regular scheduled, basically retainers for auditors each month. So we've been able to opportunistically get some more fixes into the pipeline as well. So I'm going to kick it off to Ariel actually to talk about a few minor changes and upgrades to the protocol that you can expect GIPs for soon, based on us kind of opportunistically using those audit windows.
Hello, good to see you here again in a town hall. I'm going to share my screen a bit. Wait, here. So as Brandon was mentioning, there are some changes related to GIPs that are shared already in Radical and a forum post. One is the GIP6 is for having a different slashing percentages for queries and indexing disputes. This is a change in the dispute manager contract, and it's already audited and it's in PR 458. If you want to see it, the main reason for having these changes to balance the risk of indexing and serving queries. Like serving queries is a more like frequent activity, and indexing is like something that you do when you allocate. And the slashing percentage is the same for each of these activities. So it's good to have a governance way to balance these two activities, and by having these two percentages, we basically the community and the governance can do that. So this is already explained in one of the the JP number 6 that you can look in the forum. The GIP 7 is related to what Brandon was mentioning about the vector and connecting the feed channels to the contracts. This withdraw helper is it's another contract that has some custom logic, so we can send funds from the state channels back to the protocol for being distributed to the delegators, to the indexer, and the curators. Then there are some minor fixes already audited and merged in these different PRs with these numbers. One is, I already talked about this in a previous town hall, but I will quickly describe them. The first one, delegation parameters initialization, is a bug fix that is related to if some indexer is using stake 2 instead of a stake, they might forget to initialize the delegation pool with the correct indexer cuts. So that's fixing that. There's a second fix that is related to when an indexer is closing an allocation with an empty POI, an update rewards snapshot was not being called. So there could be like a small difference in the calculation in those cases. And the third one that is, I think, quite interesting is it's an improvement, basically creating a cache of addresses for each of the contracts in the network. So we avoid fetching all these addresses from the controller. This is a contract that is a sort of a registry of all the addresses, and that way we can save some gas. Some like benchmarks, like I did, goes from 5% to I would say 15%, depending on the transaction. So it's quite interesting to improvement. Then about some future research, there was a proposal in the community about like having a more stable indexer cut that will help both indexers and delegators, particularly because indexers won't need to change the cut like often if delegators if they get many delegations. So the idea is to get a more stable cut. There's also research about getting a snapshot of the indexer cut before the allocation is created, so it's not changed like right before the allocation is closed. So I just want to comment in this because I'm like looking into this. I think it's a very interesting proposal, and I like invite you to add more comments into the discussion. Okay, this is being worked in 474 PR if you are curious. So that's most of my update.
Well,
I think
thanks.
for this, yeah. I know if you want
last-
to mention something.
Yeah, we'll get into the dispute stuff in a second. But yeah, that last one in particular is really interesting. That was, I think, first put forth in the very first protocol town hall by Gavin from Figment. And so it's really cool to see some of these kind of community ideas kind of taking shape. So yeah, so I wanted to give an update on the arbitration charter. Finally, that's kind of the one of like the big GIPs that's in the pipeline. And a lot of the GIPs that you've seen, some of them are kind of dependencies for the arbitration charter. So I believe we talked about this in the last protocol town hall, so I'm not going to go through it in depth, other than to say that please join the arbitration charter discussion in the forums. We've gotten a lot of really great feedback from folks, especially as we're seeing the first disputes take place in the protocol. I think, I've heard from a lot of indexers that now this stuff is kind of starting to feel real. One of the updates that we've made to the charter since the last protocol town hall was based on indexer feedback. And it was basically what to do when a subgraph fails, whether indexers were allowed to close out their allocation that was already in progress and still collect rewards, or if they would have to close that allocation with a 0 POI and basically, forego getting rewards for that allocation. And we basically put in an allowance that allowed indexers to complete that allocation, which means that when something that happens outside of their control, which is, the subgraph failing, they're not kind of punished for it, and they have some time to react where they're still, they're still earning rewards for that allocation. So there's a lot here. Obviously, there's a lot of sections. I highly encourage you to read this. All the GIPs, by the way, are hosted on Radical, but we've also, for convenience, as Radical builds out a lot of the pieces of their UI, we've also been posting stuff in HackMD in the forums. So it should be pretty easy to kind of go through and read what's in these proposals. The arbitration charter specifically was depending on a few different GIPs that were in progress the last time we spoke. Ariel just spoke to one of them, which is the separate indexer and query slashing. So this was just about being able to actually tune these things differently. And that was important for some of the logic that the arbitration charter defined around how to balance the risks of indexing and query slashing, right? Because, as Ariel mentioned, indexers respond to an unbounded amount of queries during an allocation, but just submit a single proof of indexing. And so the risk profile is very different, and it needs to be tuned differently. Another one that was in progress, I believe the last time we spoke, was the deterministic timeouts. So deterministic timeouts is something that we need for the protocol, so that if a subgraph, for example, enters like an infinite loop or gets stuck in some other way, that all indexers kind of see that event at the same time, right? Like for everything in the protocol, we need to make sure things stay deterministic. And so for that, we borrowed an idea that most of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with, which is the idea of gas costing, the opcodes in in our runtime for the subgraph. So Leo, I believe, introduced this last protocol town hall. I'm not going to go into it ad nauseum, other than to say the GIP is out now, and you can go through and you can actually see, how all these opcodes are being priced in the subgraph mappings. The goal here for this first GIP was to be correct on an order of magnitude basis, right? The main goal is to make sure those timeouts are deterministic, not to make sure that every opcode, is perfectly priced. They just kind of need to be roughly correct so that these timeouts are deterministic. Future GIPs might build on this work and actually try and make those opcodes, the gas costing of those opcodes, an accurate, a highly accurate predictor of like execution time, which would be a really useful feature, I think, for other parts of like the subgraph. But that's kind of future work that will build on this. The last one I want to touch on is the API versioning support. This is something that was work in progress last time we spoke. I don't believe there was a GIP out. This was the final dependency for the arbitration charter. And this was all about how do we know at a given point in time what the valid subgraph API behavior is with respect to the protocol, right? A lot of the protocol depends on determinism, the idea that, if two indexers serve the same query or, index the same subgraph, they're going to get the same result. That's kind of a core, a core building block of that the rest of the protocol rests on. And so it's important that indexers actually know what the correct behavior of the subgraph API is. And then secondly, and this is a little bit more subtle, but the graph as an ecosystem and as a project kind of has two goals that it sort of wants to optimize for in parallel. One is that it wants to push the usage of the decentralized network as much as possible, right? We kind of EdgeNode is doing this migration right now of subgraphs from its own hosted indexer to the decentralized network. That's kind of where all the tooling, and that's where all the indexers are right now. So that's kind of where we want the growth in query volume and usage to happen, as opposed to where it's been happening thus far. But the other side of that is that we also want to add capabilities to the decentralized network as quickly as possible. And something that we learned in the in the last 2-3 years, when EdgeNode was primarily the core developers on the network, was that a lot of times these features they follow kind of a life cycle, right? They follow kind of a pipeline where the very first time you implement a feature, maybe it's like experimental, then maybe the API is solidified, but then you're not quite sure if it's deterministic yet. And then maybe you get it, to a level that you feel pretty comfortable that it's deterministic, but you haven't done all the integration testing and, made sure that, for sure it's deterministic. And so, and a lot of times there's research involved, in that pipeline to see, how to make something that, normally wouldn't be deterministic actually behave deterministically. And that happens kind of per feature, right? And so the way that the protocol kind of works today is that, for many of the features in the protocol, like, for example, indexing rewards or arbitration of, indexing disputes, it relies on a level of determinism. And so what we're doing in this GIP is not only proposing a method of understanding what is the canonical subgraph API behavior, but we're also specifying what is the interaction, or what is the intersection of subgraph API features with supported protocol features. And it'll be a little easier if I can show you just an example. I'll kind of jump towards the end here. I think I've got a table. And this became particularly salient during the recent subgraph migration, because one of the subgraphs that was migrated had a feature that previously had not been supported as fully deterministic, and indexers were kind of scrambling and like, well, do we index it? Do we not index it? Like, do we submit proofs of indexing? Do we not submit proofs of indexing? And there just wasn't a lot of clarity in like what the supported behavior would be for a subgraph such as that had these specific features that were non-deterministic. And so the idea of this GIP is that you could look up named subgraph features that we've defined, and we've kind of bucketed them into several categories. Core features, which kind of apply to all subgraphs regardless of the network they're indexing or something like that. And then you have data source types themselves, which are, like, do you even support indexing Ethereum, or do you support indexing Near or Arbitrum or whatever. And then you have data source specific features that are listed underneath that. And you can kind of see this full support matrix of being defined, where you can see A is the feature implemented, and if a feature is implemented, it automatically makes it available, eligible for queries, query fees, Agora cost models. Is the feature experimental? And I'm going to put a pin in this and come back to it in a second. And then, does it support disputes? So does it support query disputes? Does it support indexing disputes? Does it support indexing rewards, right? So we only want to have the protocol pay out indexing rewards on subgraphs that have deterministic indexing, because we want to make sure that indexers are being compensated for real work. Important to note, and I'll touch on this further up in the GIP, is that not all features that have non-deterministic querying, such as full text search. So you see here that we have a no for query dispute arbitration. Not all features that have non-deterministic querying also have non-deterministic indexing. So actually a subgraph like, I believe it was the Omen subgraph that was migrated in the recent subgraph migration, it could actually support query fees. It would not support query dispute arbitration, but for those queries that involve full text search, but it would support indexing rewards and indexing dispute arbitration. And so this was the sort of clarity that was missing from how these support matrices would play out in the real world. The kind of inspiration for this, just for those that kind of come from like the web development background, was kind of Can I Use, which was this I think like really amazing website that I think is still widely used, that would tell you at any given point like what feature of the web could you use on which browsers, right? And so the goal here is a little bit different, but it's a similar sort of resource where you can understand, okay, I'm building this subgraph either as a developer or as an indexer that wants to index it, and I see the features that are included in it, and then I see exactly how those are supported in the protocol. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to develop the protocol very rapidly and keep adding features, and then let each of those features sort of granularly move through this, feature lifecycle pipeline, where they eventually become fully deterministic for disputes, for querying and for indexing, and thus supporting disputes and arbitration for both. So one question that might come up here is then, okay, well, how do I find out what named features are in a subgraph? So graph node is going to be the source of truth for this for the time being. And the reason for that is, again, because the protocol is developing extremely rapidly, the network was just launched, less than a year ago. There isn't any implementation agnostic specification of subgraph API behavior yet. That is something that's on the roadmap, so that you could have a multi-client node ecosystem. But for now, graph node is the source of truth for subgraph API functionality. And so in a future version of GraphNode, very likely by the 1.0 release of GraphNode, GraphNode will have functionality where it detects the features that are in a subgraph, and it cross-checks them against features that are explicitly listed in the subgraph manifest. And if a subgraph uses features that are not listed in its manifest, then that would actually be considered a broken subgraph by the definition of GraphNode. And what that gets you is that as a subgraph developer, it forces you the discipline of actually listing out in the manifest what features you're explicitly using, so that you can kind of understand the impact that's having on your support for that subgraph in the network. But it also means that that data is going to be, as opposed to implicitly defined just sort of by the subgraph behavior, it'll be explicitly defined in the subgraph manifest, which means that it can be indexed by the graph and shown in network explorers that are helping dApp developers discover useful subgraphs to build on, and helping indexers discover useful subgraphs to index without ever having to actually load that subgraph first into GraphNode to understand what its capabilities are. The other thing that comes with using GraphNode as a reference implementation is that we need to start versioning it using semver. So that's semantic versioning for the non-developers on the call. This isn't something we've been doing super rigorously thus far. GraphNode's not yet at a 1.0 release, but the goal is that between minor versions of GraphNode, so for those, just a quick review, semver kind of breaks things down into like numbers separated by 2 decimals. So you'll have something like 1.1.12. And the number to the far left is the major version. The number in the middle is the minor version. And the number on the far right is like a patch release. And the idea is that between minor versions of GraphNode, functionality should be backwards compatible. And between major versions of GraphNode, breaking changes can be made to the functionality of the subgraph API behavior. What that lets us do is it actually lets us use major versions of GraphNode as the canonical version of subgraph API behavior in the network, because the expectation is that between versions of GraphNode, major versions of GraphNode, until you get to a new major version, the functionality should be stable. So the council can actually vote and define, hey, this version of GraphNode is the current official version in the protocol, and the arbitrator and other indexers would all be expected to abide by the canonical behavior that's defined by the Graph Council, via this GraphNode version. While we're here, I mentioned before experimental features. Experimental features might have breaking changes between minor versions of GraphNode. The reason for that is oftentimes when you develop a feature for the first time, you want to get feedback on the API before that API becomes sort of ossified, in the library. And so this gives us kind of the flexibility for having features that are experimental. Like for example, right now we have a feature called non-fatal errors in subgraphs that is experimental. It actually probably is deterministic. We haven't done the full validation of that, but it doesn't, at this point in the life cycle, it doesn't matter because the API can't be considered stable even across minor versions. So practically, you can think of it as non-deterministic, even if in theory we could implement the feature as deterministic, because the APIs haven't solidified yet. So that's where those experimental features come into play. It's as part of this kind of semver versioning strategy. That matrix that I showed you a second ago would also be defined by the Graph Council. So at the time that the Graph Council, this could be in separate governance actions. So recall we looked at the governance actions, here in Snapshot. But the council would basically be on the hook for defining both the canonical major version of GraphNode that's defining the protocol functionality, but also defining the feature support matrix for those features that are included, those named features that are included in that version of GraphNode. So I'll pause there. There's obviously a lot of content here. I can't get through, I'm not going to go into all the details, but highly encourage you to check this out in the forums. This one's dropped relatively recently, so not a ton of feedback on it yet. And as I said, this is this is a dependency for the arbitration charter. So, you know, to really understand the arbitration charter, you really kind of need to understand the API versioning strategy, as well as, you know, the GIP that Leo and Ariel have presented previously. One final note, and then I'm going to kick it off to Ford and Ariel, but because this is kind of a large bundle of changes, and most of them aren't contract changes, a lot of these are kind of conventions and ecosystem processes, we do think this is a really good place to get community feedback. In the interest of not creating a lot of overhead logistically, we'll probably create a single community snapshot poll for the arbitration charter, as well as all the GIPs it depends on. And so that'll be a good way for us to get a pulse on, you know, do people understand, you know, what we're talking about? Do people agree with what we're talking about? Have people had sufficient time to understand the conventions, you know, that are being advocated for here? So stay tuned for that. You know, be aware that some of the GIPs, you know, that it depends on are still kind of at a proposal stage. Like, I think there's still some to-do sections in the versioning GIP, for example. I think there's so this is a way of getting sentiment on what's on the GIPs today. It doesn't mean the GIPs as is are going to be the final thing that becomes, you know, the official behavior of the protocol. It's just kind of a way of us gauging, you know, where people stand on the proposals in their current state. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to Ariel and Ford, because we actually have the first round of disputes going on in the protocol currently. If you guys are curious, you can actually find them if you go to forum.thegraph.com, governance and GIPs. You can go to arbitration, and you can actually follow the discussion there. And but I'll let Ford and Ariel kind of give you context on how those conversations are going.
Yeah, well, you can see in the forum that there were some disputes created, and the arbitration team created like a request for information. There was like, yeah, thank you, Brandon. The format for requesting the information is like there's sort of a template with some base I don't know, information that is easy, that makes it easier the process of reviewing if the dispute is right or wrong. And in this case is the request number 1 for P2P, and after receiving that information, Ford has been looking into the actual the POIs and trying to dig into the issue, but he can share more information about that. Right, Ford? I think you are muted.
Martin, do you need to enable talking for Ford?
Or maybe he's not listening. Let me write to.
Sounds like we need to make Ford a co-host.
All right, there we go. Now I'm a co-host. Hey, everyone. So as Ariel said, we're going through the first process of the execution of the arbitration charter. And the first one we're going into detail on is there were 7 active disputes against the P2P indexer. So as this is our first time going through this process, we're making sure to be transparent and really lay out a good process for the future. So as you can, if you go to the forum, you can see the information I've asked for from P2P, which includes the proof of indexing, some data from the entities that were saved for that subgraph, and some data from their Ethereum contract call cache. I've been looking at that in detail, comparing with reference indexers that we host at Edge and Node, as well as the hosted service, and a few indexers who have been helpful. And I've identified the point of divergence at a specific block and the root cause, which is a discrepancy in contract call results. I will be posting a response on this forum with a bunch of details of my investigation, so you guys can follow along with how we identify the divergence and exactly why the discrepancy happened. and then we will continue the conversation and move on to the other disputes after that.
Cool. Yeah. So one thing I just want to reiterate here is that one of the things that the arbitration charter, for those that weren't on the last town hall, specifies is that especially during the early bootstrapping days of the network, indexers should not be punished for faults that occur due to like software malfunctions or gaps in the tooling. And so part of this investigation is really aimed at root causing, why did this, it's less about punishment, it's more about just root causing, like why did these determinism inconsistencies occur. And so part of that is and keep in mind, these things can sneak in a lot of different places, right? So like there could be determinism bugs in graph node, but there could also be determinism bugs upstream, right? Like in the Ethereum node providers or your DevOps configuration, or you could have, there could be, networking issues you have that's causing you to miss certain messages that you'd expect to see. So like, it's pretty subtle, investigating and root causing these things. Ford and Ariel have been doing a really great job. We've also at Edge and Node, we've been tracking some additional tooling we want to build for indexers to help them build more confidence in the POIs that they're submitting, specifically because, you don't want to find out that you had a determinism bug after you've submitted a proof of indexing and are now on the hook for potentially being slashed, right? Even though the arbitrator will exercise discretion and try and make sure that people aren't erroneously slashed, it's still probably a level of stress and risk that you'd rather not take on if you could have more confidence in your graph node, your DevOps configuration, and the functionality that's maybe been released in newer versions of graph node. And so that's something that we're also highly focused on. But I think we're building a lot of really important muscle kind of going through this the first time. And I think it's really timely as the community kind of discusses the arbitration charter that we've actually been able to incorporate some of the learnings from going through this process back into the arbitration charter. I guess I'll also do a quick plug that like a really great place to get where a lot of this conversations have been happening are indexer office hours that have been hosted by Jim, in our community, who's also on the Graph Council. There's another one happening later today. I don't think we'll specifically be discussing the charter, but if you have questions about it and you want to go deeper, like feel free to, bring it up there as well with, other indexers on the call that have been, thinking about this stuff a lot. So I'll pause there. And I think the rest of the time, if I'm not mistaken, we just have set aside for general Q&A.
Awesome. Are there any questions for Brandon, Ariel, or Ford?
Awesome. I hope no questions means everything made perfect sense. That's my optimistic interpretation of that. But yeah, folks need more time to absorb this stuff. Like, please feel free to just hop in, in the forums. You can read these kind of GIPs and their full content and, and ask more thoughtful questions there once you've had a time to digest some of this stuff.
Awesome. So if there are no more questions, maybe we can take the last few minutes back. I just want to remind everyone to keep your eyes on Twitter and Discord. We will be posting these RFPs today, and we'd love to see you guys submit proposals for them. Awesome. That looks like it's it. So thank you for joining us for this protocol town hall. See you guys next month.